Peter, just the other day, thank you. President Trump tweeted that Abraham Lincoln is, undervalued as a president. He is, among other things, is the father, is he not, of the land-grant system in 1862.
He
right?
was, in some ways, he was one of the more successful non-war presidents in the country's history.
Right,
1860s, a whole slew of legislation.
Exactly. So we want to touch on a lot of issues facing higher education. But certainly in this project, in this Next America project over the last few years, one of our central concerns have been issues of access and equity, and you all have different perspectives of that. When we look at the trends in access to higher education, we definitely have some positive trends. High school graduation rates are improving for African American and Hispanic students, and the share of and this is, I think, underappreciated, the share of African American and Hispanic high school graduates who continue directly on to post-education has now essentially converged with white students, all at around 2/3 or slightly more. And as more students of color enter institutions, African Americans and Hispanics and Asians are all increasing as a share of the total number of graduates. But the big but is that African American and Hispanic students who start post-secondary institution remain much less likely than whites to complete a degree. What's the disconnect? What is the biggest reason for the persistence of these completion gaps? Eloy?
Well, I mean, we still face several challenges, particularly with students of color. One is, yes, they're coming to our colleges in greater numbers, but the way we're organized for these students doesn't support their continued learning. They're exposed to standardized placement exams when they hit our colleges, which disproportionately affect them. The way we finance our students doesn't support full-time enrollment. So there's a number of issues that still plague our colleges that we need to wrestle with in order to ensure that this generation of students who are finally getting to our colleges can actually successfully complete a quality credential.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I think that's definitely a mixed bag because they are going to college in greater numbers. That's wonderful, but they're attriting. They're not being retained. They're not graduating. They're amassing debt. And, that cohort is the biggest. Pew did research that shows lower income kids are much more likely to borrow and obviously much more likely to default. So that's the worst of both worlds. If you get the debt and you don't get the degree. So we're very focused on retention at Washington College. My inaugural year, we started something called George's Brigade. We did the research to see, okay, we want broader access to our college, we want more diversity, we want to bring first generation students in more, but we want to make sure they graduate. So what are the drivers of attrition? And the two biggest ones were financial need and a sense of social isolation, the research that we looked at. So we went out and raised money and decided to provide huge discounts, and so it's full need, room, board, tuition fees, everything's covered. We cap their borrowing. They can borrow for incidentals, but we cap that at $2,500 a year. Nobody's going to graduate with more than $10,000 of debt. We hired a special coordinator to provide support services, and we team them up with peer mentors, student mentors, faculty mentors, staff mentors. I had our first group this year out for a picnic at my house, and I said, are you being taken care of? Are you feeling supported? And they said, yeah. Every time I turn around, somebody's asking me. So maybe we're doing it a bit, but. It's a great group of kids. The other thing we did was he told them they could apply with friends if they wanted to, because we thought it's kind of a mini posse concept, because we thought, well, it's scary to come from inner city Baltimore to a remote Eastern Shore, small college in Chestertown, but maybe if you come with a couple of friends that you went to high school with, it wouldn't be. So we said, well, we'll review as a group. You can be nominated as a group, we'll review as a group. So hopefully all those things will work. We'll see, but so far so good in terms of this first year experience.
Peter?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we can do, and we certainly need to do it. To me, an important figure is that about 8 to 10% of the lowest quintile income families have their sons and daughters graduate.
Yes.
That's in contrast to about 85% of the top income quintile in this country. We just have to do better. It's key to those individuals and to the future of our society. The mobility has to be better. Now, I think there are some things, and I note that many publics are working at this, and some of them are being really very successful. For example, remedial education. If you take a couple remedial education courses, when you enter a college, the chances of your graduating is very low. I think if you take as many as 3, it's almost negligible. So there's been a lot of work done by the Tennessee system, for example, But beyond that, the data is pretty clear. You can work it a little differently. In brief, it's you take one way to approach it is you take a remedial course and that feeds into the part of a 4-credit course, and instead of giving 5 credits, even though it's 5 credit time, you give 2 or 3 credits, and they're just phenomenal success. We know that more intrusive, if you will, advising, that's not a word we always use, but more engaged advising can have a lot of impact. You need to tell a student when they sign up for a course that doesn't count toward a degree, you really can't or shouldn't take that course. When students begin to get in trouble, you need to have a means of tracking the so-called IPASS system.
I think Georgia State University has been really at the forefront of that, using predictive analytics to try to, again, we talked about that in the previous panel about the community college level, steering students to a greater extent on a pathway.
It's very interesting. In the Vietnam era, we sort of backed away from telling students anything, which in Prentice' idea got very much out of favor. But in effect, we've begun to move back and saying we should tell students more about what they should do or can't do. And I think IPASS is a good example of that. I could go on, but I
went to a memorial service recently in Los Angeles for Tom Hayden, who would have appreciated that conclusion. Let me ask you this, because with a paradox here, and really the great research by Anthony Carnevale at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce has been that the institutions that have the most resources, the most dollars to invest in student success, tend to admit the students who are most likely to succeed in the first place, right? So the Equality of Opportunity Project recently reported that the 5 Ivy League colleges include more students from the top 1% than from the bottom 60%. And the Carnevale research has shown that the large increase in African American Hispanic students, they've overwhelmingly been channeled toward the institutions with the least resources. So when you look at those trends, is the answer more to require the richest institutions, basically the best funded institutions, to admit more lower income first generation non-white students, or is it to provide more resources to the institutions that are actually serving them, or both?
Well, I'm obviously biased. In California, I think the resources should go to those public institutions that accept more of what is truly representative of California and the nation. California community colleges are 70% diverse. This is where most students of color, most low-income students, first-generation students access higher education in the California community colleges or in community colleges in general. I mean, we have the privilege of taking the top 100% of students. Yeah. That's a great, it's a great testament to the belief that everyone has the ability to succeed, and if just given the opportunity and the resources to succeed. So that's the struggle. How do we take a large public system in California? We serve more than 2.1 million students in the California community colleges. How do you organize yourself? How do you finance that opportunity? And I think that's what we're focused on right now, is how do we bring resources to bear to get more students who have not participated well in higher education, not only to participate, but to complete a quality credential.
Sheila, the land-grant colleges in the public sphere are certainly seen as a portal for people who might not otherwise access education. How challenging is it for them to find a way to really make that bridge work?
Sometimes it is, and the more selective the school, the tougher it is. But I think generally we do a pretty good job and probably should be doing better. I love the idea that UCLA and most of the UC university system have more Pell students than all the Ivies combined, UCLA alone. It's a great way to think. I'm not for trying to tell Harvard what to do, that they're a private school, but I think, in fact, we need to give real credit to the schools. And, in fact, it costs more money to educate and get a degree for a Pell student than it would be others, because you need more advising, you need some of the tools we've talked about.
So just to repeat that, UCLA has more Pell grant students than the Ivy League combined?
Yes.
Wow, that's quite a number.
Well, they're so big, and the
Yes.
Ivies are small.
Right. Still.
But it also is the fact that UCLA has 30+% of their students are Pell students. And that's true with Berkeley, it's true for, I think, the whole UC system. And of course, for the state system in California, the numbers are even higher.
Yeah.
So I think to your
Community
question.
college is even higher than that.
To your question, I think they should be doing both. They should be doing much more to expand access. I mean, they have these multi-billion-dollar endowments. It kind of drives me crazy. Some of them even don't do a full 5% draw every year. And then they charge tuition, or they have these very low percentages of students. They can provide a free education to them, but it's not a huge number. So I think they should be doing more of that. They should be doing helping other colleges. And I would say, apropos of your question, to funders, as one who spends a lot of time raising money, because that's one of the things college leadership does these days. You know, I can't tell you how many foundations I've got into where we only want to give to the top schools, right? So, well, not everybody can get into those top schools. And by the way, we provide a really quality education too. But I think it's self-fulfilling in terms of, you know, you talk about consolidation in the corporate sector, but you're seeing it in the college sector too, with these massive accumulations of wealth and endowments.
You know, just to button up this area, Eloy, you know, you mentioned the community college system in California is 70% diverse. We're now at a point where a majority of the public school K-12 system in the United States are kids of color. And at some point after 2020, I think the estimates are around 2025, a majority of the high school graduates are going to be kids of color. It's an irreversible change. Is the higher education system, in your view, prepared? Does it have a sense of the magnitude of the change? And is it prepared to kind of create a system that will allow that broader, more diverse entering student body to succeed?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to that question. I think, you know, in general, certainly the publics recognize this tidal wave, recognize the challenge that's before us, and I think they are enthusiastic about meeting this challenge. And there's a lot of great innovation happening in our colleges and universities. The challenge is that the system is not prepared for it. The way we finance our colleges, our universities, if you just think about what's happening today with the Pell system, we're talking about cutting the Pell system. We're not talking about expanding the Pell system at a point in time when you have more first generation, more low-income students trying to access higher education. So the system itself, I don't think, is recognizing the need, the economic need of the tidal wave that's coming. I think our institutions are recognizing it, and there's a lot of innovation. And so our challenge is to create systemic change that really supports these outcomes.
You know, Bill Fry of the Brookings Institution, also University of Michigan connection, who may be our favorite demographer at Next America, he's projected that because as kids of color become a larger share of the entering freshman class, that if their completion rates do not improve, that sometime after 2020, the total share of adults in the country with college degrees will start declining, possibly for the first time ever, if not maybe in the Depression. There's very little precedent for the idea that the share of our workforce with a college degree will start going back down,
We can't have that happen.
Right.
We've got to increase the graduation rates. I mean, it's a major effort of most of the publics that I talk to, and I talk to virtually all of them. And needs to be even a greater effort.
Who do you feel has their arms around it best? Where do you look to and say, okay, this is a model that works?
You mentioned Georgia State. I think Arizona State. I think Central Florida. I think there's a number of schools, not a large number, but several that this juncture are doing an extraordinary good job. And I think there are a number more. We've just been beating on this, actually, a number more, 25, 30 more that you could see could in the years ahead, maybe they need some help and encouragement and support, but could become phenomenal success stories. And everybody's got to do a better job. And I think I've been at APLU for 10 years, and I was at Michigan State for 11 plus before that. I see in the last 5 years an interest and the excitement about doing a better job with graduation rates, particularly for low-income students, which is a lot of minorities, than I saw 5 years ago. I haven't quite seen the figures, and we track the figures carefully, retention and graduation rates. But I'm hopeful, though it's going to take pressure, and there's some things we got to do. We got to get year-round Pell. for example. We've got to, I think we ought to hold schools more accountable. We've got some schools, and it's not just the for-profits, it's some others that have terrible graduation and job rates. And they shouldn't, in this age of scarcity, terrible performers can't eat up money that other places could use.
Let's talk federal policy for a few minutes. And Sheila, let me start with you because you have spent a lot of time in the city. Hillary Clinton had a very ambitious agenda when it came to higher education, including tuition-free 2- and 4-year education, a revamp of student loan programs, a moratorium on student debt payments. By contrast, Donald Trump said very little about higher education in any direction, and Education Secretary DeVos also said very little about it at her confirmation hearing. It is more kind of known with the K-12 reform. What do you expect from the Trump administration and Congress on higher ed over the next few years, and what, if anything, do you want to see them do?
Well, I'll only speak to the higher ed level, but I do hope, he talked about, during the campaign, he talked about income share, to shift from debt to an income share type of situation, so that we scrap this idea of debt completely. It's broken, it's hurting kids. Make a contract with the student to say pay some percentage of their income over a long period of time. The Australians have done it for years. It automatically adjusts to, so if you're going to teach math in inner city high school and making $40,000 a year, you're going to have an affordable payment. If you go work for a tech firm and make $200,000 a year, you're going to have an affordable payment. Everybody's got downside protection. It's good for in the macroeconomy because if you get into a cycle, people lose their jobs. They lose their hours. The payment automatically corrects as opposed to debt, which is very inflexible. You get these massive defaults we're seeing now. So I think he talked about that. Jeb Bush, I thought, actually had a very interesting plan. And Mitch Daniels at Purdue has been pioneering it. We're looking at doing something at our own college, just in terms of the college, financing it through something like that, through philanthropy, which also gets to the accountability issue, because if a college is itself financing through income share, it has its own economic self-interest to make sure that student graduates, gets a job, and provides some return that can replenish the pool for future students.
Before I bring in Eloy and Peter, let me follow up, because you wrote to President Trump after the election,
I did,
urging him to focus on the debt.
And I did an editorial in the New York Times about it too, yes.
And any response?
Well, I had a few positive discussions with the transition team, and it's kind of been left there. So I'm hoping, and I still hope that they will engage in that topic again in October in Ohio. He gave a speech along those lines, and it has the virtue of dramatically simplifying these programs too. It's just the FAFSA is so complex that the different repayment plans are so mind-boggling. Just have one simple program, one simple ISA program, and one simple grant program, a Pell, and build it out. I agree, because for low-income kids, you want to do a grant model, or at least to pay for a good share of it. But I think through simplification, that in and of itself deters low-income kids to going to college, just because of the complexity of the process.
One more question to you before bringing in the two gentlemen. You've compared the student debt crisis with the mortgage crisis, and you speak to that with unusual experience, having been up to your eyeballs in the mortgage crisis. What is the comparison there, and what, if anything, does that imply for federal policy?
Well, I know I'm not always popular when I say that, but I do think that this freely available student debt has led to tuition inflation. It's been too easy to raise tuition because it was too easy for kids to borrow. You had the same thing in the mortgage crisis. It was too easy to borrow money to buy a house and speculate on houses, and you were driving up home prices. You really weren't increasing access to home ownership, and the jury's out about how much more we're really increasing access to college with all of this debt. We're certainly getting a lot of kids in trouble over their head, and it's a drag on the economy too. I mean, what really drove the recession in 2008 and 2009 was a pullback in consumer spending because of all this unaffordable mortgage debt. You're seeing the same dynamic. It's less pronounced with student debt. Young people, we're a consumer-driven economy. Young people tend to spend a greater percentage of their disposable income. But guess what? Their disposable income is being reduced dramatically by these outsized student loan payments.
Eloy, what do you want to see from federal policy? Or what do you expect to see? What do you want to see for the next couple of years? Well,
I think certainly if there's a recognition of what we've seen post-election, that a lot of people feel disconnected to this new economy. And certainly this is true in California. There is a growing divide between those with education and those without. That has a direct impact on wealth, on ability to really thrive in this new economy. So what we'd like to see is a focus on community colleges, who serve the greatest majority of working age adults that either want some sort of credential or are now unemployed or underemployed and need a credential to fully participate in the economy. So we'd like to see a recognition that the community colleges are a place to invest, to get people to the jobs that the president wants to create. We can talk about job creation all day, but unless we have a workforce with skills to enter those jobs, then there's no point. So that's what we'd like to see, and a recognition of how we're going to finance that. Certainly year-round Pell, investing in Pell for students that come to our community colleges. We want them to get out more quickly. We want them to take as many units as possible. So in order to make that happen, we need to have the financing available for them to do that.
Let me stick with that, because we just heard from Oregon and Tennessee, which now have statewide programs of tuition-free community college, each of which, both of them said, grounded on the belief that now 14 years is what people need to succeed, not 12. We had President Obama propose that as a nationwide program, Hillary Clinton as well. What do you think of that idea? Is, in fact, 14 years what people now need? And if so, should the states, should the federal government, should anyone guarantee it to them?
Well, I certainly believe that high school diploma is no longer the default to get into the workforce. We have to reorganize ourselves around a different set of credentials in order to and finance those credentials in order to allow people to get into the workforce. So I agree. It's well beyond the 12 years of high school now. So in California, you know, we have a unique situation. We are a low tuition state. We have kept tuition down. California Community College is still the lowest tuition in the country. So the cost of tuition isn't the biggest barrier. It's the cost of attendance. So for us, making the promise, we already provide about 65% of our students don't pay tuition in the California community colleges already. So we're already making the biggest investment in free community college. We just don't call it that. Our issue is trying to figure out how we're going to package students in a way that allows them to go to school full time and not have to work and go to school in order to take a full-time load so that they can get into the workforce as quickly as possible. So that's the promise that we're working on. How can we package a student in a way that allows them to finish their credential as quickly as possible?
Before I bring in Peter, just to follow up on that, before your current position, you were in Long Beach.
Right.
And you worked on a comprehensive effort to move more students, particularly those from lower income, into past high school with the Long Beach Promise. And that involved a lot of coordination between the K-12 system, the community colleges, and the four-year colleges. Talk a little bit about what you did and whether you see it relevant on a bigger scale.
Well, first, we certainly see it relevant on a bigger scale because the focus is on the student, not the institutions. If we focus on the student, then we begin to blur the lines between the systems and help those students track their way from early childhood education all the way through a bachelor's degree and beyond. That should be the focus. So all we did in Long Beach was, take a look at what the student needs and try to make sure that we can keep that asset in the community, give that individual the education they need in order to become an economic asset for the city of Long Beach. And so we want to do that on a bigger scale throughout California.
Well, what was the critical variable increasing the share of kids who were able to go on and succeed? Was it financial aid? Was it mentoring? What was the biggest barrier, and what did you have to do to overcome it?
The biggest barrier is cultural change, is getting into the homes of these students and helping the parents and the students believe that higher education is for them and the importance of higher education to their family and to their future. So once we accomplish that, and we do that through various means, working with them from early as fourth grade, and then making the financing piece as easy as possible, but also providing the support they need and the educational preparation. So we can't do that without a strong K-12 system, public K-12 system.
Peter, appreciate your patience here. What do you most want to see from federal policy in the next couple of years?
Well, I've got a whole long list, of course. If Margaret Spellings were here, she would say we need to get the unit record. We need to have a way to track graduation rates by individual institutions. We put together something called SAM that does a lot better than the federal government iPads. But we need very desperately the employment and income information a few years out after graduation. There's no way that the big institutions can know where those people are. And you need that by college and program. The federal government should have that and the states to hold us accountable. That's one thing. I agree that we need quite a lot of simplification of all these programs. These repayment and forgiveness programs are a maze, and I'm not sure they're doing it in the right way anyway. I'll tell you something that astonishes me is that you can draw a full-time loan when you're a part-time student. Now think about that.
That's crazy.
I mean, this is crazy.
You know, the House Better Way document, both of you were kind of referring to streamlining. The Paul Ryan blueprint they put out last summer talked about streamlining federal aid programs into one grant, one loan, and one work study. Does that sound like it's on the right direction, or does that worry you about what that might actually mean in practice?
Well, the reason we've got this complexity is in part because we were adjusting to various circumstances. The work study programs have some real value. But I'm not, it's like doing the tax code, not quite as bad.
Yeah.
But I think that you can do more than what we have.
Now, the other end of the spectrum is we heard from Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and now from Andrew Cuomo in New York, picking up that baton, 4-year tuition-free public college or university for students of families at, I think, 125K or below. That's putting a lot of money down. Does tuition-free public university make sense in your mind?
Well, I think you'd have to do it right, and frankly, I'm not counting on it tomorrow morning anyway. I mean, I think that those are good political statements, and I'm not saying people aren't getting it done and where they'll do it, but I think those that are running institutions need to say, I need to work it next year, and I've got to contain the tuition, I've got to cut costs, I've got to reorganize, and I've got to drive my numbers for retention and graduation. I mean, those topics are more discussed in forums like today than they are on individual campuses.
But if you have a state like New York moving in that direction...
Well, will they?
Will they?
Will they? I mean, we'll see what the governor can do.
Do you think...
I'm not close enough to it. I haven't asked Nancy's
not whether
input.
they will. Do you think for public universities, would they see that primarily as a positive for your members? Or
Well, sure,
would they worry
sure.
about it?
We would think that somehow they're getting more resources. But I think that we need to be held accountable for how we spend what money we get. And we live in a world today that's really tight. So,
what would that mean for private?
Yeah, well, I think it's, you're right, it's a good soundbite. I think obviously it would skew choice heavily towards the public sector. There's a lot of accountability with a private school. I mean, we're constantly under pressure. We are expensive. The way we provide education is expensive. Very small classes, regular, tenured or tenure-track faculty members, a lot of hands-on learning, a lot of tutoring help and that type of thing. So it's not cheap, and we try to provide scholarship assistance. But because of that, we have a lot of pressure to show our value. And I do worry that if you just make it completely free, that lack of accountability could get even worse. And also, I think, another thing I worry about is that our public high schools are not doing very well. We've never really fixed that. And to what extent are we now trying to make college the high school? So instead, we're not really enhancing and expanding educational capabilities at some institutions. We're just trying to fix what they're not doing in high school anymore. And so I do worry that I love the idea of free community college in certain ways, but that some of the advocacy for that is just the high schools are not functioning well. Let's make community college free and see if we can fix it there.
You have all been drawn into issues beyond the immediate orbit of higher education under this new administration. Eloy, you and other heads of the California higher education wrote a letter to President Trump about the DACA students. On behalf of DACA students currently pursuing their dream of higher education in the United States, we urge you to continue this important program. This has to be especially relevant to your world. Latino students are the largest single ethnic group in the system. What has been the impact of the administration's words and deeds on immigration on your campuses to this point?
In a word, fear. fear of what's going to happen. I mean, we're doing the best we can in California. We're fortunate we have a governor and leadership of the legislature that has made clear that we're going to defend the values of California. And the values of California include honoring those who are in our state and giving them an opportunity for education, because we see them as economic assets. We've already been through this argument when we had Prop 209 and Prop 187. We don't want to go back to those days. But as much as we can reassure students that it's safe for them to come on campus, we see the fear that's being created by the administration. So we think that's counterproductive. We'd like to see that end, and we'd like to see some predictability and an opportunity for students to come on campus and focus on what they're there to do, get their education.
Likewise, Peter, a couple of weeks ago, you released a statement in response to the revised travel ban, and it read, "Our nation's universities thrive in part due to their ability to connect throughout the world. This new executive order undermines that ability." Why did you feel compelled to weigh in on the travel?
Well, our universities are very concerned about this. I think, in fact, international students are key to the things we do. They're key to our society. It's pertinent that last year 6 Nobel Prize winners were all foreign-born. And we all feel that virtually everybody in higher education that this is important to do carefully.
There's evidence that applications from foreign students is declining, right? Correct?
There is nationwide. We have not seen that, but yes, I mean, our students we had a student from India who came in and said he was taking all of his stuff home for spring break because he didn't think he could get back in. It had to do with India, but it was just the aura of fear and a sense of unwelcomeness. So we also issued a very positive statement about welcoming all students, all nationalities, all religions, but it's hard.
More broadly, I mean, we've had university presidents before who were important public figures in various ways. I think back to Robert Maynard Hutchins or Clark Kerr in the 1960s. But I'm wondering, in this kind of increasingly turbulent political environment where you have all of these issues beyond those directly about Pell Grants or Perkins loans affecting you, do students, faculty, donors have an expectation that people leading higher education institutions will be more engaged in some of the public choices, or is there reluctance to see them?
It's a great question. Within a period of time I've been involved, Father Hesburgh was such a great figure.
Right?
And we haven't had these public figures out of university presidencies nearly as often as you did. Hutchinson was 50 years ago. Right. Kerr was
50 years ago.
Yeah. Hutchinson was even earlier, actually.
Right.
But so many things are happening that touch upon us beyond just making our places work. That maybe we'll get more involved. It's hard. It's hard because we're so busy.
Yeah.
We got so many things. It's also hard because we're in the middle of a media cycle that makes it difficult to do what we are supposed to do and do this public thing. But it's always appealing because there isn't any of us that don't have some views.
And is there expectations though? I mean, are the students in your, do they expect the leadership now to advocate?
Yes, I think there is an expectation that we will advocate for our values and that we'll be very public about our values. I think no one expects our college presidents or university presidents to be partisan, but certainly to lead on the issues of value and engagement and citizenship and what that all means. Because I think our democracy relies on our public universities, private universities, colleges, to really foster that civic engagement. And now is the time when we need to get into that work, because now is the time that it's become so important.
Sheila, you've written defending the idea of the liberal arts education when one of candidate Trump's advisors questioned whether students pursuing esoteric, I think was the word.
That's right.
Esoteric should receive federal aid. What do you think is the role of the university leadership at this point?
Well, I think it's tricky for me because I was in Washington for a long time, and I still get asked a lot of questions about other Dodd-Frank and things like that. So that's easier. I think I celebrate the ability of students and faculty to engage and speak up. I think when the institution takes a position, it should be something that affects the institution. And clearly on the the immigration issue, it impacted the institution. And so I do think it's appropriate then to articulate our views and defend our institution. But I think once you start going beyond that, then you start losing a little bit of credibility. So again, I think faculty, as students, and we're actually a very diverse political community as well at Washington College. I encourage them to speak out, but in terms of an institutional voice, I think we should stick to the things that actually impact us.
It's a great issue, isn't it?
It is interesting. Let's bring in, we have something all the way in the back, over here somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Leticia Bustillos. I'm with the Campaign for College Opportunity. There's no question that increased student diversity on campuses has changed higher education. What we're not seeing is that same change reflected in the ranks of faculty or in the ranks of system leadership. What can be done to start changing that to reflect more of the student population?
Good question.
Well, I mean, certainly our institutions have not kept pace with the changes, the demographic changes, some of the social changes. And part of that is, there's a whole system misalignment. I mean, I have the pleasure of also working with the University of California, and we see the challenges in graduate education, the challenges in the diversity of the graduate student body. And so, that's where our faculty are trained. And so if we're not keeping pace in our graduate programs, if we're not focusing on those challenges in our graduate programs, they're not going to be reflective in our faculty or our administrators. So we need to look at this entire cycle of how we affect the change that we need to see.
We've got we're pleased to have a grant from the NSF right now looking at diversity in faculty. It's a plain grant, but we've been doing some careful thinking of how you could intervene along this whole chain. It's a problem, and when you look at the figures, the percentage of the diversity in the faculty hasn't changed much over a long period of time. I'm pleased to see the NSF and others are really focusing on it, and we have to do better. It's interesting that, in fact, people have been talking about this as long as I've been involved in higher education, 20 plus years, and the figures haven't moved much.
We have a question over here, and then we have a question over there.
Yeah, hello, my name is Sergio Marrero. I am co-founder of Anyone's Learning Experience, and my question is about how are we creating successful pathways beyond the 2- and 4-year degree. So McKinsey report shows 45% of 4-year graduates are in jobs that don't require 4-year degrees. There are too many people with higher education degrees driving cars right now as a way to maintain their income. And there's a mismatch between what higher education provides and what the workforce needs. What are we doing? And myself, as a first time in my family to go to college, have seen much of my family struggle to gain access, but also struggle to advance in the workplace. So how are we creating more flexible options other than 2- and 4-year degrees?
I think it's a really good question, because I think one of the sad facts we all like to talk about, a lot of people do this to justify all the debt, is that there's a big premium in the workforce by having a college degree. But the sad fact is most of that has occurred because real wages for people that only have high school degrees have declined, not because the earnings power of people with college degrees has increased significantly. So you're absolutely right. It gets back to the value proposition, holding colleges accountable, not just for graduating, that's important, but making sure those degrees mean something. And we put a big emphasis on experiential learning. We put a lot of our own money into it. We have freshmen from the beginning build resumes. We pair them up with faculty for collaborative research. We will pay them, we'll provide a stipend for them to do an internship with a local business. I think those types of outside the classroom experiences that are related to their field of interest very much more strongly position them to enter the workforce. So we're an undergraduate school, so we have limitations in terms of other things a major university might be able to do, but I think it's something all schools need to be focused on. It's a really good question.
We do need that the Department of Education be able to gather this data on income and employment a few years out. That needs to be there so students can have that information. The question of of employment and whether or not you get a degree. The reality is that today, people with degrees have about 2.5% unemployment, what the economists call friction. Essentially no unemployment except for moving between jobs. And it strikes me that that there is a need for more degrees, particularly from those lower income family groupings. On the other hand, I do think that certificate and other work can be very important.
Let's hear one last question.
I'm Joe Reddix, and this is a personal observation. I've been in IT for about 50 years, and what I've noticed is that we're moving toward away from a highest educated to a workforce that is more cost-effective, or the lowest cost workforce. Education is going to be extremely important to both of those, the highest educated and then the cost of the labor force, and especially going globally. If this current administration is focusing on saving money and things like that, what would be the emphasis to have such a higher level of education, whether it's community college or traditional four-year or whatever? My point is this: if we are segregating the workforce, and I see this in the lower income brackets especially. I came from an environment like Gary, Indiana, and I saw it where the education that was afforded at that level was not at the same level of a Princeton or a Harvard or whatever. Our workforce is a lot more collaborative and communicating now, so those boundaries, geographical boundaries, usually are starting to fade, where you have capabilities because of global communication and more collaboration to enhance your job perspective. The key is what we as the government and people who are the ones who are putting the government together doing to enhance our workforce to make sure that both the lower economic levels and the higher economic levels have a more peer-to-peer based approach going forward.
Kind of the role of education in a more stratified economy, I guess, is the
Well,
core.
I mean, you know, what we don't want is a situation where, you know, those of us with the degrees are now saying that we don't need more people with the degrees, and, you know, the rest of you just get a certificate.
Right.
But we have to create a situation where, particularly for the bulk of the public who now needs a post-secondary credential, to create credentials that allow them to continue to move forward in their lifetime, so that they're not stuck in one direction. So as the economy moves, I mean, what we know today from the research is our students are going to have to switch jobs 10, 12, 14 times in their career. We need to provide an environment for them to continue to gain those skills over time so that they can fully participate.
Let me add one final fact as kind of a final thought to that, Sheila and Peter, which is that, to me, the single statistic in all the years, my years writing about education, that higher education, that sticks with me the most, is that today, if your parents were graduated from college, you are 5 times more likely to graduate yourself than if your parents were not. And we think of higher education as the great leveler in our society, the ability, anybody can go as far as their talents can take them. That in many ways, it acts more to kind of reproduce privilege at this point.
Maybe reinforcing
the status quo. So can the system be viewed, be viewed as a success if, in fact, it is so much more likely that people whose parents attended are themselves likely to attend?
Well, we got to change it. We got to change it. I mean, your sponsors here, Illumina, Gates, and others, and universities around this country. I mean, I would say that one of APLU's primary missions is changing this. We feel intensely. It's just unacceptable to have 10% of the lowest quintile families get degrees. I mean, it's just, and people that say more of those folks don't need to get degrees, well, that was the argument we had over the GI Bill in 1945 in this country.
You know, and if the land-grant college is actually succeeding in that, maybe President Trump will find that President Lincoln's historical reputation at last will get what it deserves. So, Sheila, you get a final thought.
Well, you know, we already started the conversation. You have to go out and actively recruit the students. You need to find the financial support for them. We are all in on this. I actually have 2 first-generation alums on my board. So, but you have to do it. And I also think, though, it's important in terms of the higher education choices first gens make. They're not automatically steered into vocational schools. That troubles me a lot. You know, those technical schools will probably be obsolete in a couple of years. I'm not saying vocational schools have their place. I don't want to suggest that, but a liberal arts college will teach you how to think, adapt, communicate, write, and those are things that are going to serve them well throughout the career, no matter what happens with technology or the economy.
Eloy, Sheila, Peter, you're giving us a lot to think about. Join me in thanking this panel. Lindsay.